guys. So I am planning on reading later in this stream, but I wanted to first have a conversation, kind of a story time, about a lesson I learned with a certain person. And I think it's really interesting how the universe works, because I think you do attract to yourself one of two things. You either attract to yourself blessings from, you know, the good you've put out into the world, or I think you attract, when, you know, maybe you haven't been putting out positivity, I think you attract lessons that you need to learn into your life. And I remember this one that's so apparent to me now, and this happened to me like during probably the most negative time in my life. I had just been basically like abandoned by most of my family members. That's another story, for religious reasons, and it was really hard. I found myself facing homelessness and unemployment, and it was a really crazy time, and I recovered very well, and a lot of those things that happened have healed since then. But right after that had happened, I had basically been kicked out of my home, and I was working a part-time job at the time, and I live in California, there wasn't a lot of places for me to live with such a low income, and I was actively looking for another job, but I wasn't finding anything at that point. So I ended up renting a room in a house of this middle-aged man, and I won't use his name, we're gonna call him we'll call him Mike, okay? Mike. And Mike was, I really care about Mike to this day. He was a good person, but he had a lot of trauma, and he was healing from some things. And it's like, we had two really, damaged people that ended up in like each other's lives. And I think we both grew to a point because of that, but it was an interesting time. So first of all, I am 22 at the time, and Mike gets wind that, oh, congratulations, Addison. Mike gets wind that I'm 22 during like the application process, and he's a little too excited, and I find out later it's because he has this beautiful ex who he had 2 children with, who is a little mentally unstable. She has borderline personality disorder, and he thought, because they don't get along, that if she got wind that he was living with a woman who was 22 years old, like, that looks really good. He loved that, you know? There's something really insecure about someone who thinks that way. So I start living with him, and the deal I had made is rent was low. I was renting out a room. I was only having to pay $300 a month, but in exchange for that, I was helping him to nanny his 2 sons that he had joint custody with on the weekends. And so that was the deal I made, totally fine. Now, a month into living there, I actually found a really good full-time job. And I could have left. I could have gotten my own apartment at that point. But I was feeling really insecure. I was scared that I would end up losing my job, or, you know, ending up homeless again. So I just stayed and saved. So I never was in that same position again. And I'm glad I did that for the most part. But what was interesting about this situation was Mike owned the house, and there was another roommate we had. She was in her late 20s. She specialized in autistic training, and his oldest son was autistic, so that was perfect. And we would both, you know, watch them on the weekends. And the thing is like, the reason that Mike wanted help on the weekends is he'd like to just like take a step back. He didn't like to be actively involved in, you know, watching his kids. He liked to go take care of things, and he kind of just like, he wanted the fun parts of being a dad, but he didn't want the responsibility, you know, and it was a lot, okay? And I would like to say I'm not judging. I am judging. It was a very old school kind of thought about like how dads are supposed to interact with their children. That's my personal belief, my opinion, okay? But the thing is about Mike is that it didn't matter whether or not I was on the clock or not. He was very controlling. Can I name one baseball player? Babe Ruth. There you go. So one thing that he would always do if I was out late. Now, mind you, I was in a monogamous relationship at the time. I also had friends that I was hanging out with. If I came home at a late hour, he would always question me about it. He would always ask me where I was going, things like that. And it almost felt like, even though I was an adult woman living in his home, completely unrelated to him, he just felt the need to constantly keep track of where I was. And he always said like he was my friend, but he would always like judge my behavior if he didn't agree with something. It was sad. It was bad. And the thing is, I was such a people pleaser at that time because I was living in so much fear. I didn't have the ability to, say, Mike, I don't appreciate when you say that. It is my choice. I'm following your rules under this house, but I can go live my life however I want to, And I do think looking back, it was his own insecurities of his life just falling apart around him that he had to grapple on to control of everyone else in his life. And I think the lesson that he had to learn during this was that you can't control other people. The lesson that I had to learn during all this is that I have to stand up for myself. I have to be able to communicate hard things with people I care about or that maybe have a power dynamic over me. And that's something I'm so much better at now, but it is something I still have to actively work on because it's not easy for me. It is so much easier to just say, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to be appeasing. And I think a lot of women are trained socially to do that. Or when we do stand up, we get kind of emotional because we're not good at communicating that, standing up. It's a new thing for us. It's a skill we have to learn. So the more that we practice these kinds of things, being able to talk to our boss, our landlord, say, hey, and you can meet them halfway. Say, hey, I understand what you're going through. This is how it's making me feel. And I would really appreciate if you just respected that. Like, that goes a long way. And if you can kind of, like pet their insecurities and be like, hey, I know you're feeling this way, but also stand firm and say, hey, I'm not going to put up with this. It's a beautiful balance, and it works. I would say 90% of the time I've used this tactic, I have not burned bridges, and I've been able to get what I want, the things that I deserved, and be treated as I should. So that was a lesson I really had to learn. And the thing is, I was just continuously living in this house. And honestly, I don't know if I would have left unless someone came into the picture. And the person who came into the picture was a guy, I'm going to give him the name Jim. Jim came into the picture and he kind of just broke it up. Now, Mike was a Capricorn, I'm a Pisces. We get like that, those signs that go very well together. Jim was an Aries, and he came into this house like a tornado, like almost like sent from above. Okay, now Jim has had his own problems. Jim was a hypocrite. He preached a lot of like religious thought. He liked to counsel people on things like that. But he was a hypocrite. He was a liar. He was a thief. That came out later on. But on the surface, Jim served a really good point. And Jim came into my life. He had replaced the other woman who had gone to go live with her fiance, who is a specialist in autism. And he was a specialist in autism training as well. So he comes in. And he's actually such a blessing. Because before this, the autistic son was not really speaking at all. Yeah, Legend Sebastian, feel free to put whatever questions you have in the comments. So he comes in and he's actually helping the oldest boy, we'll call him Larry, he's starting to help him to speak. He hadn't been speaking up to that point, a few tiny words, He was actually starting to put sentences together. He was making great progress, having him in the house. And I think Mike just liked to really control Jim, like he was doing me. And Jim's personality, you don't do that. He didn't have to learn that lesson, but he showed me how to say no. I was watching Jim and I was like, yeah, like I felt that, but I didn't feel like it was my place to say something, but I should have. I was watching him and I was learning from him because he had something that, Like, I think Jim had to learn integrity from me, but I had to learn this lesson from Jim. I really think people are in our lives when you know, to learn from them, especially when, you know, they add like discomfort to our lives, you know? Oh, you know, I haven't watched that Legends. So yeah. So he comes in and I start saying no. I start saying no to Mike and I start communicating with him, and I'm actually really proud of how I conducted myself with Mike. I had practiced the conversations beforehand because, again, I was new to talking to people with a power dynamic with me. I was new to standing up for myself, and I felt like I would have gotten too overly emotional with it if I hadn't practiced it. Now, you can't always like guess what someone else is going to say, but you can come up with, you know, in your mind, what would they say? How would I respond to it? What is the argument I'm trying to make? How do I tactfully say it? And actually saying the words out loud really creates more of a fluidity when it comes time to, because you have that muscle memory already there. So I remember having this conversation with him right before I told him I was going to be moving out. Oh, very good, thanks. Right before I was going to be moving out. And I just remember him, you know, trying to deflect everything I said, any criticism I said, even though it was with tact and with love and with all those things. He couldn't take it in. And what's interesting is I finally moved out and he had all this resentment against me. But the thing is, I'm a professional accountant, and I was doing his accounting while I was living there. I still do his accounting to this day. And what's interesting is I would still come over occasionally to do his books, and he would tell me things about Jim before they finally broke off, and he would complain to me about him. And I just got a little bit better at being, you know what, I think maybe this is where Jim is coming from when he says that. And, you know, not being like, Mike, you're wrong, but just saying like, hey, like, maybe there's another way to look at this. And at that point, because the power dynamic was gone, it was easier. But yeah, it was definitely a lesson I had to learn. And the reason I bring this up is because today, or I should say last week, I got a text from Mike. And Mike was like, hey Kelly, do you have some time today? Because I need you to do my accounting today and get it done and up to date. The thing is, with Mike's books, he owns a small business. In theory, he would only have to do his books once a year, you know, for tax season. The thing is, those people, like, it's beneficial for them to do their books every month. But, you know, we do his every couple of months, you know, like, it's just cheaper for him. It's not a problem. No problem, okay? But occasionally he'll get this where he calls me up and he says, Kelly, we have to do my books right now because this loan person needs it, or this government official needs my stuff. And I'm like, Mike, you have to give me more than a day's notice. Okay, this is not fair to my schedule. I can't drop everything I'm doing to serve you. I can't. And I remember, like, last week, I told him, I said, and because every time I say that, he'll be like, well, can you just, maybe just have an hour? Do you have just like half an hour? Can you just like squeeze me in? Or he'll say, after work, can you do it? I'm like, if I am working an 8-hour day, I don't want to go do accounting right after, okay? Like, that's a very fatiguing job. And, you know, so it's still there. Like, it's still that thing where he has not learned his lesson, and I have to constantly go back to what I've learned and put my foot down. And I understand, like, I don't want to lose him as a client. Like, it's a good gig for me. But I have to put my foot down when it comes to those boundaries, because he does not respect them, you know? And I think we all have people in our life who just don't respect those boundaries. And it's hard to be firm with them because we love them, or we care about them, or we see their situation and we feel bad for them. But Good Luck Jamal says, yo, calm down. I'm fine. I'm really okay, Jamal. I'm just expressing myself on my channel, okay? But yeah, so that was the lesson I had to learn there. And so I'm still dealing with that. And here's the thing. I think it is just so important to be able to express yourself in a, effective way. I think it's really important to think about what am I going to say, what is the goal of what I'm trying to say, and stick to it. Don't get caught up in the weeds. Don't, get emotional. I think emotion's good, but don't let that lead the conversation. Obviously, emotion is going to be there to tell you when something is wrong. It's okay to be angry. It's just like we don't want to say things out of anger that we don't really mean. It is that balance always. So that's my little spiel for today. I'm not going to end the stream now, but I am going to switch gears a bit. So give me 1 second.